Hello, this is Douglas Robinson with Trebuchet Software, and in this video, I'm going to talk about the benefits of using a tool like Microsoft Access or LibreOffice Base in this instance for relational database management without requiring code just for entering data into a database. Now, an example of this that I'm going to be using is a blog page that I'm setting up for our website. And on this blog, I have a front end for the website that actually, it's written in ASP.NET and it retrieves data from a database to display this web page. But on the back end, or I should say separate from this, if I want to enter data, I now have the problem of, do I want to go through coding out a web page just for me to enter data onto the blog? Or can I use another tool and just drag and drop a form together for entering the data? Because for me, as an internal employee, I guess, at this company or owner, whatever you want to call it, I can attach something called LibreOffice or Microsoft Access, a database management tool, to the database on the back end. And I can go and create forms to enter the data into that table. And creating the forms are a lot easier than writing code to manage entering the data into that database for some simple tables. Like if I needed to be able to enter, hey, we have a new customer and there's 5 data points, and I don't want to go and create a web page and have to manage how it's displayed on all of these other things. I can just open up the actual form here because I've got a LibreOffice database file here that's actually going out and connecting to our Firebird SQL database. The other benefit to this is previously I was using SQLite, and I don't believe, SQLite is it's an embedded database, which means it sits as a file on a server and you can't connect to it remotely. So then you have to manage both the entering data and retrieving data all has to happen from the code side, but also, potentially creating the databases has to be done programmatically if you're not, if it's something that's getting generated from code. Whereas otherwise, you can just send SQL statements, if it's a server like Firebird is, and we're using Firebird because Firebird is free. You don't have any weird licenses or limitations like you do with SQL Server or MySQL. And Firebird, unlike SQLite, which we were using for all of our stuff before when we moved off SQL Server, it has a server. It can also be used for embedded stuff, but it has a server, and more importantly, LibreOffice has native support for it, so you can just go out and connect to a Firebird database. And then you can do fun stuff like just browsing and editing the tables remotely as if they're a spreadsheet. And you can edit the data here. If you want to, you can go and add new tables, and this tool will actually give you a what do you call it, like a designer or a wizard to go and create tables in that database remotely. You can build out specific queries that you can save to go and run data or retrieve data from there. You can build out reports within LibreOffice Base. So it's a very, very powerful tool that lowers the amount of work that you have to do on the programming side. Whereas for us, there are going to be a couple of opportunities, for instance, on our blog, where we just need one web page to go and display a bunch of data. And then other things we're doing with it, like maybe running reports, entering different bits, editing, attaching things, whatever it's going to be, can be done separately from a backend like LibreOffice rather than, hey, I have to have many different web pages for everything that I put out that's going to be visible to our users. And this will also make some other things a little bit easier. But I wanted to go over it here because to me it's a kind of a fascinating concept. Like separately, when I've worked on other programs, like I work on an IT service management tool like Sharewell, and it does something very similar to this, only there's a cost. Frankly, it does it better, but this is great. You can create little tables, you can attach forms, you can build out relationships and other things. You don't have as much automation inside LibreOffice Base, but in Microsoft Access, which is basically the same thing, but for Microsoft, you have like macros that you can do with VBA. So it can be potentially very powerful. Whereas in the past, I've looked at things like this at other companies and thought, huh, that's weird that they would go through all that effort to put stuff in Access. But then you see like very complicated, not complicated, but like very well built applications with, special logic like sending out emails and reports and other things where you can have people actually doing all of their work in databases where you may not necessarily need it on a website. You might not need a desktop application if all you're doing is, hey, I have a table here where I need to collect some information. I need to display it in a form, and maybe I need a couple of buttons that do things with that information, like sending an email with it or, doing something or tracking that information. So I thought this was kind of useful, and I figured I'd go through a practical use case for it where, we're working on having our blog run with a backend of a Firebird database. And I can just go through and rather than having to build out a page for tracking, like entering the data in and doing all these other things, like at least in the short term, as far as like, oh, I want to get a product out the door, I can just say, well, I just need a form real quick that connects to this table and fills in the data where I can go edit it. And later on, I might actually build a page for this, but it becomes one less barrier to, hey, I need to get this done today. Let me go and attach a form to this data table, and it's done. So hopefully this wasn't too much of a rant. I just find that kind of stuff really, really cool to where like, hey, we're gonna have different things on here. I might have other pages where like basically you run into the issue of, when you build out a lot of complicated logic in some places, you have different configurations that are managed by what I would call lookup tables, which are just tables full of information that have to be manually managed. And something that becomes like a challenge for me, or not really a challenge, but a chore, is, let's say we have 10 different tables that are scattered across these different apps, and they're just tables that have to be managed. And so then the question is, do you want to build out interfaces on your apps, your web apps, your desktop apps, whatever, where you can enter in the data for those 10 tables? Or can you have something like LibreOffice Base or Microsoft Access where you can just open the table and start adding records into it manually without having to actually build out all of that programming code, or just build a form? And so that's what I wanted to cover here. Hopefully it was useful. Have a good one.